All right then. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the protest groups in Gibraltar. Okay, you probably know the ones that I'm talking about. These are supposed to be like direct action groups who claim to defend Gibraltar's interest, etc., against Spanish incursions and some of the abuses by the Guardia Civil. Okay. Now the question that I want to ask is, well, do these direct action groups actually represent anybody in Gibraltar, and do they have the support base that they so often seem to assume that they have? Recently, okay, there was some news about a new group which appears to be a splinter group from an already established group. I think they call themselves Movement for Gibraltar or something or other. It's a group which is very similar to the Defenders of Gibraltar, which is well, a type of pressure group that's been very active recently. The spokesman of the new group, the new Movement for Gibraltar, is this rather haggard-looking gentleman. His name is Trevor Bickerstaff. Okay, and unless I'm very much mistaken, he is actually a former Defenders of Gibraltar, former dog. Okay, now what's so different about this group when compared to Defenders of Gibraltar? Well, according to Trevor, the new group is like non-discriminatory, and they go out of their way to list a whole bunch of reasons why they wouldn't discriminate against people. But curiously enough, their tactics appear to be very similar to the Defenders of Gibraltar, especially with respect to censorship. It's very difficult for anybody who is not part of their circle to express their opinions on their Facebook pages. They actively ban people and censor people on Facebook, which rather suggests that they're not as tolerant as they make out, and certainly quite discriminatory against people who may not necessarily share their point of views. Okay. Unless I'm very much mistaken, this group is a splinter group from the Defenders of Gibraltar, and I came across an article a while back which suggested that what the new group was not happy with was the domination of maybe one or two people that were in the Defenders of Gibraltar group. For example, they go out of their way, the new group goes out of its way to emphasize that they do not have a spokesman or a chairman or whatever it is that they call themselves, which rather suggests that maybe the structure in Defenders of Gibraltar was a little bit authoritarian. But, well, I'm just guessing that. It may not be the case. But it certainly does seem as though what bugged these people who have split from Defenders of Gibraltar is, well, their politics. Okay, perhaps they were a little bit too close to some political circles for comfort. But like I said, the new group hardly seems to be any different. That's my experience anyway. Okay, what about the Defenders of Gibraltar? Well, the Defenders of Gibraltar almost seem to be untouchable, although they have made a lot of mistakes recently. But there was a time last year when the conflict in Gibraltar spilled over, when the Defenders of Gibraltar were practically running the rock. Anybody would think that Gibraltar was theirs rather than a British colony. But, it has to be said that their political links are very, very questionable, even though they have the attention of some very important people in Gibraltar. There's a lot of doubts about who they mix with. I mean, this recent trip to Morocco, for example, they received a lot of flack from ordinary Gibraltarians, and quite rightly so. I mean, here we've got the Defenders of Gibraltar popping off to Morocco and speaking to a very, very questionable group. I believe they're called something like Direct Action for the Liberation of Ceuta and Melilla. Okay. And, well, what a political group may do in Europe, in Gibraltar, which is inside the legal framework of the country, and what a political group may do in Morocco, are two very different things. And I think it made people in Gibraltar very uncomfortable when the defenders of Gibraltar came back saying that they had a lot in common and with the Moroccans, and that the repression by Spain was very similar, etc. It did rather sound a bit too radical for most ordinary Gibraltarians. Okay. Another thing which seems to annoy a lot of people is the links between defenders of Gibraltar and the openly xenophobic UK Independence Party, which at times does sound a little bit like Le Pen's right-wing groups in France. The UKIP party is extremely popular in Britain, but their message is very much an anti-European message, which is quite curious, because I think up to the point where the defenders of Gibraltar started rubbing shoulders with the UKIP party, they seem to have a lot of influence within the government, but quite clearly the government in Gibraltar is very pro-European. It's in their interest to stay in Europe, and obviously rubbing shoulders with the UKIP party has made the defenders of Gibraltar a little bit less close to the powers that be. Okay, what about their actions at the border? Well, a lot of people seem to think that, well, the defenders of Gibraltar have done a good job distributing hot water to people who are sitting in their cars for hours and hours. But some of their actions at the border are a little bit questionable. I personally don't believe all of the reports in the Spanish press. I think the Spanish press lies continuously. Most of them are owned by banks and people close to the fascist government in La Moncloa, and I certainly don't believe everything they say, but there are some reports that have appeared in the press which I think should worry a lot of Gibraltarian peoples, with suggestions that maybe their tactics and the tactics of these groups are not altogether peaceful. Okay. It's interesting to note, for example, that at one point last year the police in Gibraltar actually told this group, the defenders of Gibraltar, to move away from the border. They were a little bit worried about some of the provocation that was going on at the border, and the police themselves asked them to move back and threatened them with legal action if they didn't move back. So I think it would be wrong to assume that the defenders of Gibraltar have the support of the police or support of the government. Maybe at one point they did, but I think it's fair to say that they don't. And the new movement certainly doesn't. This new movement for Gibraltar. The first thing this group did was to criticise the Foreign and Commonwealth Office over the incursions by Spanish paramilitaries, which is a very strange thing to do. If you want to defend British territory, the first thing you do is you criticise those who are undermining the ROC's sovereignty. You don't criticise the British, especially not when the British have bent over backwards to defend Gibraltar. I find the attitude of these groups a little bit perplexing, to be honest with you. I find it very strange that the first decision that is made by this new group is to criticise the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I find that a little bit puzzling. I think the people of Gibraltar should question the motives behind those decisions. Now, like I said, these groups, defenders of Gibraltar, etc., seem to have a lot of influence, but I mean, what I would say to them is that they're not legitimate. They don't represent anybody because they haven't been voted. They act almost as if they are an extension of the government. They act almost as if they have a mandate and they've been voted they've been voted in by people, but in fact they haven't. I mean, the defenders of Gibraltar even go so far as to make cute Christmas speeches, as if anybody cares. I mean, I find that really quite puzzling, that they should release a speech like the Queen of England at Christmas, sitting on their couch and telling the people of Gibraltar what they should think and what good eggs they are. I just don't agree with that. I mean, nobody's voted for these people. I don't think they should have that. They shouldn't assume that they have any political role unless they've stood for elections and they've been voted in for elections. These groups do not represent the people of Gibraltar necessarily. Only the people of Gibraltar represents themselves, and through their government they make the right decisions. I find these groups a little bit radical in their positions. I think that the message that they're sending out is too nationalistic. They associate themselves with political parties which are very xenophobic, very anti-European, and that should send out a very clear signal to people in Gibraltar. They are actually damaging Gibraltar's reputation, though they may not admit it. They are, by constantly criticising the UK and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the governor, surrounding the governor, questioning him aggressively. I think those are not the actions that you would expect from people who claim to be proudly British. I have my doubts about that. I think there's constant criticism of the UK, and this almost reluctance to allow anybody to criticise the Spanish. It's okay when they criticise the Spanish, of course, but when other people criticise the Spanish, they seem to get awfully uppity about it, and it's hardly surprising. According to the Spanish press, a large proportion of the defenders of Gibraltar have Spanish grannies. I think they need to decide whose side they're on. Gibraltar is a British colony, okay, and it is proudly British, and it will remain British, and people of Britain have a right to say that. I almost get the impression sometimes that when they say it's British, they say it to irritate the Spanish, but when we say it's British, they get upset about that, because they feel that Gibraltar is Gibraltarian or Yanito, and they can't have it both ways. Gibraltar is either British or it's not, and it is. It's 100% British, and proudly so, and it will remain so. And in that sense, I do not believe that these groups are representing the interests of the people of Gibraltar.